Imagine you're at the peak of your career, holding a leadership position in the C-suite, with the weight of critical decisions resting on your shoulders. In this high-pressure environment enters the C-suite whisperer, a figure of wisdom and calm. They don't just listen in silence, they feel the pulse of the team and the organization. In meetings, the whisperer doesn't provide direct answers, but instead challenge you with thought-provoking questions, like, how can your vision inspire every level of the organization? Or, what legacy do you want to leave as a leader? These questions push me to reflect deeply, to look beyond the immediate numbers and strategies, and to consider the human and ethical impact of my decisions. The whisperer also supports me in moments of doubt, reminding me of the importance of empathy and authenticity. Lead with your heart, they say, and the results will follow. Instead of dictating the path, they show me that effective leadership is rooted in trust, in oneself and in the team. They teach me to truly listen, to value diverse perspectives, and to foster an environment where innovation thrives through collaboration. This mentor guides me through complex challenges, not with a heavy hand, but with a firm and compassionate presence. They push me to be better, to avoid settling for the comfortable, and to always seek growth, both personally and professionally. With the support, I learned that leadership is not just about directing, but about inspiring and uplifting others. So, creating a culture of excellence and humanity at every step is critical. Today's episode will captivate you with its focus on humanity, the need to embrace curiosity. Trust me, you will see what I mean by this. And also an inside look at one of the world's leading companies from the perspective of its people. Plus, we'll talk about a little bit about music. Hackers del Talento, el podcast que busca cambiar el juego por lo humano en Iberoamérica. Nuestra tercera temporada está enfocada en ti.
Luchar con determinación por lo que quieres en la vida, ¿no?
Entender por qué te levantás todos los días y vas a determinado lugar o te conectás para desarrollar una tarea. Entender el por qué.
Un equipo que sean coachables.
Una persona que no es capaz de hablar de sus fracasos, o peor, que considera que nunca tuvo fracasos o nunca tuvo fracasos, es una persona en la cual definitivamente no quiero invertir. Pues yo quiero invertir en personas que hayan fracasado muchas veces, porque quiere decir que aprendieron un montón.
Cree en tu talento, tus capacidades, para que seamos parte clave de una región más competitiva, inclusiva, equitativa y próspera, donde juntos pongamos a las personas en el centro del mundo del trabajo.
Nuestra responsabilidad es ayudar a líderes a que conecten su cabeza con su corazón.
Porque es imposible hacer algo o tomar acción sobre una situación o sobre un problema del cual uno no es consciente.
Esperamos que disfrutes esta tercera temporada, porque va a ser una fuente de inspiración, unión, colaboración, aprendizaje, debate para la comunidad interesada en el talento. A través de historias, hacks, reflexiones.
Yo me leo a mí mismo para que no se me olvide lo que yo que enseñaba. Sea fiel a eso que usted escribió y que reflexionó. Así.
A mí me han dado un par de consejos muy buenos, prácticos. Uno tiene que leer lo que escribe. Y hay otro que también es práctico, que no es tan filosófico, pero que también me ayudó mucho. Y es que a la gente hay que recibirla.
Y conversaciones con CEOs, líderes de talento humano, escritores, actores de cambio, vas a recibir múltiples ideas para evolucionar como persona, como líder y para que tu empresa sea mejor.
Soñar y pensar en grande es exactamente igual que hacer soñar y pensar en pequeño.
Te invitamos a regalarte este espacio para ti, con conversaciones profundas y significativas que te harán pensar y te inspirarán a tomar acción. Únete a nosotros en este viaje para hackear el talento y juntos cambiemos el juego por lo humano, por un futuro fuera de serie. Our hacker today is Jennifer Turner, Director of HR Consultancy for Alphabet Companies.
So my shorthand is that I am the C-suite whisperer. I'm a support system for the executive team of my companies. And my job is to make the biggest impact that I can to help them be as successful as they possibly can. And I do that sometimes as a coach, sometimes as an advisor, sometimes as a subject matter expert, and in all aspects of where they feel they need me. And for each of my clients, it's very different based on their maturity, their leadership team, their board, the chief people officer, their resourcing model. It can be really different, but I play where I'm wanted and needed and where I can make the most impact.
What has her experience been like after more than 17 years at Google and now at Alphabet?
It's amazing. It really is. I mean, I am very fortunate in that I have watched Alphabet grow from, I joined in 2007. There were 14,000 employees, and now there are over 200,000, or close to it. I have stayed so long because it is a company that has prided itself on hiring great talent and empowering people to make decisions and get work done with autonomy. And I have always experienced that. Now, Google is a much bigger place than it was when I started. There are a lot more silos. There are a lot more product lines and businesses than there were when I started. And it's not the same company that it was on day one, but it's still a really incredible place to work. I work with some of the smartest, most interesting people. I have time and time again been put in situations where I've been able to stretch and step out of my skill set or existing role to do something different. There's been a lot of trust in me and my abilities to take on new things. And so for that, it's been a great experience.
Let me explain what it means to be a C-suite whisperer. Jennifer's story is deeply connected to education and its potential. She grew up in Pennsylvania, in a suburban area where kids could run freely. A challenging moment in her life turned into something positive, shaping who she is today.
I had a very, very happy childhood. My parents were both educators. My father, a college professor, and my mom, a business leader at a corporation where part of her job was to teach others. And so I grew up really having education be core to who I am and how I was raised. My parents were married for 20 years before they split. And I was 10 when that happened. And I always say that I actually have a better relationship with my parents now that they are not together than I did when they were together. So I kind of, I would categorize my growing up in two phases with them. First, the phase of them being together, and second, the phase of me being together with them when they were apart. They were both really committed to family. And even though they knew they didn't want to be married anymore, they wanted to be equally parenting me and part of my life, which I think now you see a lot in split families, but you didn't really see that as much when I was growing up. My parents told me that I could do whatever I wanted and be whatever I wanted. And they really lived into that in so many ways. They gave me so many opportunities to explore my interests. They encouraged my talents. and they supported me in making choices that not every family would encourage.
La donna è mobile, qual piuma al vento, muta d'accento e di pensiero.
Luciano Pavarotti was born on October 12, 1935, in Modena, Italy, into a humble family. Surrounded by music from a young age, thanks to his father, a baker with a passion for singing, Luciano felt an irresistible pull toward opera early on. By 9 years old, he was singing in his father's choir and soon realized that his destiny lay in the world of music. The mentor and the journey. At 19, Pavarotti began taking singing lessons from renowned tenors Arrigo Pola and Ettore Campogalliani. With her guidance, he honed his natural talent and prepared for the challenge of the competitive opera world. In 1961, he won the Achille Per International Singing Competition and debuted as Rodolfo in La Bohème at the Teatro Municipale in Reggio Emilia, making the start of his heroic journey. In 1990, he became part of the Three Tenors with Plácido Domingo and José Carreras. Their concert at the Bath of Caracalla in Rome became a global phenomenon, bringing opera to massive audiences. The song that we're playing in the background is Donna è mobile. So, it turns out that singing is one of Jen's passions too.
I was a really creative child, and my parents knew that I loved to sing and perform. We would go to family parties, and I would get up in front of the group and sing. We would go to weddings, and I would get on stage with the band and ask if I could sing. And so they really fostered that in me and encouraged me to audition and perform and travel as a performer, even when I was 13, 14, 15. I decided to go to school for music. And it was a really easy choice for me. And my parents really supported it, even though I heard a lot of the, well, what do you mean you're going to get a degree in music? What are you going to do with it? My parents never said that, and they never questioned that no matter what I studied in school and no matter what I went after, I would find a way to use that to have a happy and healthy life. They also provided me opportunities to cultivate my love of drawing and art. They gave me opportunities to study things that maybe I wasn't going to get in my regular school program. We traveled quite a bit, both when my parents were together and after. My mom and I took trips all over the world to see different cultures and places, and it really informed who I am today. So I feel really lucky that I grew up with the parents that I had. I'm an only child, and that never felt limiting or restrictive. When my husband and I decided to have children, and I said, I only want one, many people said to me, well, who is your child's best friend going to be? And how are they going to grow up? You know, how could you leave them without a sibling? But for me, I didn't feel like that was any loss at all growing up. I had wonderful friends who I have chosen as my family, who I have chosen as my siblings. And in many cases, they're richer and stronger than people I know who are actually blood relatives.
Transforma tu futuro hoy. ¿Estás lista? ¿Estás listo para ser esa persona líder que refine talento humano en tu organización? Recuerda, invertir en ti mismo, más que una decisión inteligente, es el acto más poderoso de liderazgo que puedes realizar. Y nuestra academia, Hackers del Talento LATAM, más que un programa de formación, es una inversión en tu potencial ilimitado, una puerta a convertirte en visionaria, en estratega, capaz de impulsar el cambio, la innovación y adquirir las nuevas herramientas para transformarnos en este mundo tan tecnológico y tan humano. Te voy a dar 4 razones para que apliques cuanto antes a la Academia Hackers del Talento LATAM. 1. formación de vanguardia. Aprende los mejores, porque es que nuestros profesores son vicepresidentes de talento, CEOs de renombre en América Latina, listos para compartir su experiencia y conocimiento y transformarse juntos contigo. 2. Conéctate con una comunidad de élite. Al unirte, te integrarás a una red de profesionales con ambición, con sueños, que enriquecen tu camino profesional y personal, con una gran experiencia laboral, que además probablemente se convertirán en buenos amigos tuyos. 3. Contenido revolucionario y actualizado. Nuestro currículo abarca temas clave para tu futuro, desde estrategia, antropotec, mindset para hackear el talento, liderazgo, impacto, influencia, conocimiento del negocio, analítica de personas, inteligencia artificial. Mejor dicho, te vamos a dar herramientas para que te posiciones y estés a la vanguardia en tu área, en people, en gestión de lo humano. Y por último, la experiencia educativa es de alto impacto. Nuestro enfoque innovador combina teoría y práctica, retos de transformación, coaching entre pares, acceso a cientos de contenidos asincrónicos y mucho más. Y al final, lo que estamos haciendo es garantizar un aprendizaje dinámico y profundo. Entonces, ahora es tu oportunidad para ser ese líder que guiará tu transformación en talento humano. Aplica a la corte número 5 de nuestra Academia Hackers del Talento LATAM. Es muy fácil. Ve a hackersdeltalento.com y ahí encontrarás toda la información para que te atrevas a hacer el cambio, a ser ese líder excepcional que el mundo necesita. El futuro del talento te espera. Comienza con la decisión de ser más, de impactar más. Invierte en ti y sé el líder del mañana. A hack for anyone who is or aspires to be a parent.
I wasn't an equal to them by any means, but they respected me as a member of the family, as a contributor to the family, even though I was their child. And so early on, I learned how to interact with others. I learned how to have conversations with people who were very different from me, some in age, some in experience, some in interests. And I think it really shaped me to have empathy and understand the human race in a different way. And I've tried to really instill that in my son as well.
Are you the vibrant soul who lights up every gathering, drawing energy from the buzz and conversation? Or are you the guardian of silence, finding power in the calm of solitude and the depth of your thoughts? In a world full of noise and activity, the real question is how you recharge your energy. Do you feel alive in the hustle of the crowd, where every conversation sparks a light within you? Or do you seek serenity in tranquility, where each moment of introspection renews your clarity? Whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, your essence is a fascinating enigma, revealed in the way you choose to be reborn each day, a continuous dance between the external world and your inner universe. Now, how is Jen?
Interestingly enough, I've always been an extrovert. I really get energy from being with people and being around people. And I was in high school someone who knew every person in my school. I was friends with the musicians because I played in the orchestra, and I was in the annual musicals. I was friends with the art students because I like to take art as an elective when I could squeeze it in. I was friends with the honor students and the top academias at my school because I was in all of the hardest classes and I did well in school and took it seriously. I was friends with the athletes because I was a cheerleader and I was very active in the sport community, not personally playing a sport myself other than cheerleading, but being in the social aspects of going to the sporting events and cheering on my school and showing my team spirit. So I was someone who had relationships in all the groups and all the networks, and in some ways brought them together. When I left school, when I left high school, I went to college for music. And as I said, I studied opera performance. I always knew I wanted to be a musician, but I didn't really know how much I loved classical and operatic music until I started singing it. So that was a bit of a shift. I always thought I would be a Broadway performer and go to New York and sing in musicals. But once I got exposed to opera, I realized how much I loved the mental challenge of it. I loved the aspect of learning a language and having to perform in the original intent of the composer. It was an intellectual challenge that stimulated me much more than some of the Broadway music that I had been exposed to in the past.
One of the questions she always gets, it's about music and HR.
I often get the question of how did you move into a career in HR from music? And it was in some ways a large leap and in other ways not a very reasonable and understandable path. And we can definitely talk through that if you're interested. So after college, I went to graduate school to get my master's in performance. And at that time, my intent was to work professionally as an opera singer. I had the opportunity to sing at music festivals in Italy and perform with regional opera houses in the United States. And one of the jobs that I had, I was working during school for the Talento Opera. And I was a resident artist there. And my job was to go into inner city and rural schools and perform children's opera. But before we would go in for the performance, we would go into the classrooms and teach the kids about what they were likely to experience. So for many of them, this was the first time they had seen an opera of any type. And even though it was a children's opera with shortened time frames and kids-themed stories, they weren't really sure what to expect. So my job was to write and deliver a workshop for the children to help them get ready for and get excited for what they were going to experience. So my workshops, I had to think about what they needed to know, write my learning objectives. I had to think about how I was going to present that information in a really compelling and interesting way. So doing instructional design. And then I had to collect my content and get ready to stand in front of a group of usually anywhere from 6-year-olds to 10-year-olds and keep them engaged for 45 minutes. So that was a real challenge for me, but it was my first foray into the world of HR, specifically learning and development. Years passed, and I did more of that work, and I did more performance, and I was, auditioning and living in different cities across the country. And at one point, I, as many artists do, I went to a temp agency, a temporary firm, to get some work while I was between gigs. So I said, all right, well, I don't have any money coming in, so I'm going to go and see what kind of short-term assignments I can get to bring in a little bit of money in between. And one of the temporary assignments I got was to work at one of the big 5 consulting firms. They needed someone to do data entry, and I knew how to type. So I went in and started learning about what they were looking for. I got really lucky that day because the assignment was with the education consulting arm of Ernst & Young. And they weren't just looking for someone who could do data entry, but they were looking for someone to enter all of their learning content into their knowledge management system. And so I went in and I started doing it, and I started interacting with the people on my teams, and I was sitting around incredible PhD instructional designers, people with years and years of experience doing project management and program management, editors and content writers, graphic designers, and technologists. And after 2 weeks of being there, the general partner pulled me into his office and said, "You know what? You're really smart. And I think if you've enjoyed being here over the last couple weeks, we'd like to give you a job, and we'll teach you instructional design on the job. We'll teach you the craft. Just, from working. You don't need to worry that you don't have the experience. You don't need to worry that you don't have a degree in this. You're surrounded by experts. And so if you're interested, we'd love to bring you on board and have you grow through the company." It was one of those magic moments in your career where someone sees potential in you and they offer you something that changes the trajectory of your career. They saw my potential. They saw my interest in learning. They saw my ability to think critically, problem solve, be creative. And they said, "We can use this." Now,
I think it's crucial that you take out your notebook and jot down this hack as a leader, as a family member, as a part of a group of friends, how to highlight people's potential, empower them, and build their self-confidence. Continuing with Jennifer's story, she kept growing in the world of L&D, learning and development. Spent 5 years in consulting until a client offered her an opportunity. Obviously, she continued singing, but not as much as before. And let's see how this story continues.
The story continues, I think, because in order to be in learning and development, in order to teach people about the work that they are doing, it required me to get to know their business context, to get to know their work, to get to know their jobs very well. So I became an expert in pulling information about the business. I became an expert in asking the right questions to understand how the work got done. And I got to know the company inside out and backwards because I was responsible for onboarding new people, writing technical manuals on how to do their jobs, assessing what they needed to be most successful in their jobs. And in doing that work over a number of years, I got to know our company inside and out. So when the company decided as a business strategy to outsource all of our customer support, I got pulled into a Tiger team to find the right vendor, country, partner, and bring them up to speed and get the operations going. So this was a group of people. There were project managers, there were technical experts, there were learning folks, there were subject matter experts from the actual technical work that we would be outsourcing. And as a team, we went through a huge process to outsource all of the call centers to India. I had the opportunity to spend 6 weeks at a time in Bangalore, living and working with our art outsource partner and making sure that they could handle the operations the way our company wanted it to happen. And as a Tiger team, we rotated in. So I might be there for 6 weeks, and then I would be home for 6 weeks, and then I'd be back for another 4, and then be home for 3, and then go back for 6 weeks. And there were always 2 of us on the ground at a time. That experience in my career really opened me up to wanting to do international business, wanting to understand and really embrace the cultural differences of how companies operated in different spaces, in different countries. It was so fascinating to me. Again, I think it harkened back to some of my background and my intellectual curiosity, but it also really gave me an opportunity to learn something new and to expand my expertise into a peripheral area. Again, I always feel like I'm standing on in the same tree, but the branches keep going in different directions. And as I think about my career in culmination, I feel like I've filled out that tree now to a place where I can hop from branch to branch. I actually have the whole tree is built out, and it's enabled me to do the type of work that I do now, which is much more in the organizational strategy, business, consulting, advisorship to C-suites and boards. And I'm able to kind of pull from each of the different branches of my tree from the different experiences that I've had across my career.
Her career grew rapidly. What did she learn from so many regions and cultures?
I think really letting go of your assumptions is the first thing. What you believe to be true in your own culture and your own experience is never what is true in another culture or experience. And so really embracing that and knowing that and being able to go into every situation, not assuming that you're going to understand it, not assuming that it's going to be just like what you've experienced before, but actually walking in with curiosity, walking in with an openness, a clearing to learn instead of be proven right or wrong. And I think that serves me in so much of my work. It serves me in how I think about working with and supporting underrepresented communities and groups. It serves me in how I think about building a relationship with a new executive or leadership team. It serves me in how I think about going into a new industry, like a company that perhaps is in a field or a type of work that I haven't worked in before. And it definitely serves me when I travel and when I meet people from different countries and different walks of life. So that curiosity was a huge learning for me. And at first I tripped over things. We made mistakes. I'll never forget the day I was in the office and I was in the middle of a session and I ran out of photocopies. And so I left my classroom to go and get additional copies at the photocopier. I just walked over to the machine and put the paper down and I pressed 10 and made 10 more copies. And the uproar in the office was, I didn't understand it. It was so unexpected for me. And what I realized was I was doing someone else's job. I was doing a job that was not my job. And there was someone in the office whose job was to purely make photocopies. And if I was doing it, he was not doing his job and he could be criticized or penalized for not doing the work that he was supposed to. And I didn't realize in any way, shape, or form. In the US, we roll up our sleeves, we do whatever task needs to get done, whether it's the photocopies or the, hosting the CEO of a very important company. That's done by everyone. And yet in India, at this time, in this company and in this culture, everyone had very distinct roles and responsibilities, and I was breaking that social norm. So learning about that and realizing that there were likely to be things like that everywhere that I didn't understand or know, and to be curious and to ask and to read up on it and to do my research. Those are all things that I took forward from that moment on. And that was just one example of it. There were many others.
Another hack: walk with curiosity. Let me tell you something. The word curiosity has its roots in Latin. It comes from the Latin word curiositas, which in turn derives from curiosus. Curiosus means careful or solicitous and is related to cura, meaning care or concern. Over time, curiositas came to refer to the desire to learn or know more, often about things that doesn't necessarily have an immediate practical impact, but are intriguing in their own right. The evolution of the term reflects a shift from an emphasis on care or concern to a broader sense of interest and desire for knowledge. Today, curiosity describes that intrinsic quality of humans to seek answers, explore the unknown, and gain new insight. So, how did she get to Google?
So I had many roles at this company, but when I was ready to leave, I applied for a job at Google, and after 3 months of interviews, I got the job. And I remember at the time people saying, "What do you mean you applied for a job at Google? The only way to get a job at Google is through a referral." But I didn't have a referral. I just went to the website and submitted my resume. Now, things are very different now. This was 2007. Actually, it was 2006 when I applied. And at the time, I applied for one learning and development role, and I started interviewing, and lo and behold, they decided to go with a different candidate, and they realized that actually I was going to be a better fit for another role that they had. And so they fast-tracked me into that role, and I interviewed with a few people, and then got that job and joined Google. My job at the time was to work with our Asia Pacific and Latin America sales offices and bring learning and development and infrastructure to those really nascent offices. The smallest office was 2 or 3 people. The largest office at the time was, I think, 110, and that was in Australia. All of the offices were very isolated. They had people doing the core sales jobs that were needed, but they had no infrastructure. They had no HR. They had no learning and development. They had very little leadership. And so our team was meant to use the resources of the rest of Google and bring into market what they might need, and then help them decide how and when to build what infrastructure for themselves. So that's where I went next. And I did that for about 1.5 years before we decided that Asia Pac was large enough and sophisticated enough to build a hub in Singapore and become its own region, the APAC region for Google. And we hired all the people who were doing things from California and traveling in and supporting from afar. We hired all those people in market and let them be self-sustaining. And that was a really proud and wonderful, but also sad moment, because I got to see the impact of the work that I did in a really positive and wonderful way. But I also had to say goodbye to a really large group of clients and friends that I was supporting for a long time, and I really enjoyed that work. But it was the right thing for the business, the right time for me to move on to something different and something else. And I got to see that full circle, as I talked about before. It wasn't just my recommendations and then walk away. I got to see the actual transformation of the business. And I learned that that's actually what lights me up. It's the business transformation that actually gets me excited about my work.
What drives her passion?
I love to see people and companies grow, evolve, shift, and change. And much of that happens because of the ultimate goals and direction of the business strategy. Some of that happens also because of the goals and the needs and of the individuals. And so I love when those two things are merged together. But ultimately, I believe that everything you should do in a company or business should be in service of those business goals. And when your individual goals don't match up to the business goals, it's time for you as an individual to move on. Because ultimately, we are here to serve the purpose of the business first and foremost. That's just how I approach my work and how I approach my career trajectory. When I was in a moment where my personal goals did not align to the business goals of where I was, it was time for me to move on.
She transitioned from learning and development in Asia and Latin America to where she is now, Director of HR Strategy Consulting for Alphabet Companies. What was the most significant change within this company?
The largest shift really happened when Google created Alphabet. And that's where my career took a giant step in a different direction. And I didn't really know that that was happening until it happened. With the creation of Alphabet, Google said, we are going to separate a portfolio of projects and ideas that we think could be businesses. And we're going to report on them differently. We're going to have them have their own entities, their own corporate structure, their own leadership teams, their own philosophies around how they'll do things. And it's going to be a process to get them ready to do that. So let's hire a small team of people who have expertise in a number of different areas. And let's help them, let's support them in moving forward. So they brought me onto this team because of my learning and development and OD experience. I was doing a lot of organizational design. I was doing performance consulting. I knew I had a background in learning technology. I had done programmatic work. So this was like a great culmination, using the branches of my tree again in a different way. And they thought, this will be really helpful. We're going to provide 6 trees for all of these companies, one who's a finance expert, one who's a learning expert, and one who's a staffing expert. And we're just going to, help them decouple. And after about 6 weeks of discovery with my new portfolio of clients, I realized they didn't need this at all. This isn't what they needed. For many of them, they were put in a situation where they had a job that was so radically different from what their job was just 6 weeks ago. And they needed coaching. They needed business skills. They needed someone to shepherd them into this new arena in a supportive way. And so I went to my leadership team and said, can I go do this work instead? I have a whole bunch of new CHROs who have never been CHROs before. They absolutely have no idea what their job is. Can I go help them figure that out? They said, yeah, sounds great. So I had to go back. You mean for them or for me? Although I had never been a CHRO, so I didn't know how to be a CHRO either at that point. This was, 10 years ago. I had to go very quickly figure out what were the skills these people needed, what was the content and the expertise we needed to bring to bear, how was I going to help them develop that, what did I need to learn in order to support them in those spaces, and how was I going to facilitate that change. I did a lot of capability building. I did a lot of networking. I did a lot of learning myself. And in many cases, helped move these people into the leadership positions that they're in today. Some of them are gone. Some of them are still here. Some of them are chief people officers in other companies. But I felt like I got them to a place where they could actually execute and operate without me. And so I said, okay, I'm done doing that. Now I need to figure out what's next. Where else can I make an impact? Where else can I use my skills to make the biggest impact that I can? And in each of those moments in time, I have just looked at where is there an opportunity and what can I provide that's going to help stabilize and transform such that I can walk away and they don't need me anymore. And I've done that in different places in different ways. And along that route, I have built out the breadth of my HR experience. When I started, there was no HR experience. And then I built the branch of L&D pretty deeply and heavily. And then I built another branch around talent management. And then I built another branch around workforce strategy. And then I built another branch around compliance and HR practice. And then I built another branch around consulting and relationship management. And each of those branches I have built at different times in my career and strengthened them in different ways, jumped back and forth, used them in different ways. But they've all kind of brought me to the culmination of where I am today.
Basically, what Jen has done is to understand her current strengths, potential, and interests and connect them with future opportunities to build her career and stand on the path of curiosity. So, do you remember how we started this episode talking about being a C-suite whisperer? Now, how does she view this role within the C-suite?
Well, I often hear being in the C-suite is one of the loneliest jobs because you are supposed to have it all together. And no human being ever has it all together all the time. So how do you surround yourself with the support system that you need to bolster you in the places where you might want or need at any given moment in time? People don't always need me. Sometimes they need someone very, very different from me and with very different expertise. But being able to know that you're going to need that at some point and surround yourself with the right people at the right time, I think makes really strong leadership.
A key, crucial message for standing out in HR.
When I think about the CHROs that I work with on a daily basis, one of the principles and practices that we talk about is being a business leader first and an HR expert second. So how do you make sure that your voice at the leadership table is as relevant and insightful about where the business is going as it is about where you've got a talent retention problem or how there's a risk in your compensation strategy? I think that some CHROs tend to weigh in only when there's an HR topic. And I think that that puts them at a disadvantage to really be seen as a business leader. I think the role of the CHRO has 3 or 4 components. And it's really similar to the role of any C-suite, but it also has one extra. So I think the role of the C-suite is to be a business leader first, make decisions for the business as a unit to push forward the business goals, move in the trajectory toward profitability if that's what you're doing, or whatever those goals and milestones are. First and foremost, the C-suite is in charge of making good decisions in that way. Second, I think they have a role in leading and running their organization. So they are a functional expert, and they do have a staff of people underneath them. So they play a role in ensuring that that group is empowered, that they've hired the right people, and that they are functionally running that specific function for the company. I think they also play a role externally as a champion for the company, as an advocate, as a mouthpiece. They could be doing sales, they could be doing recruitment, they could be doing speaking engagements, but they are a representative of the company and have a responsibility externally and to the board. And then lastly, for the CHRO, I think they also play a role as a coach and right hand to the CEO. And this is a place where chemistry and relationship is critical. Having trust, having vulnerability, and having a stellar relationship with your CEO is a critical success factor for the CHRO. And when that is not in place, I think there's a disconnect in the ability to really get things done, to be that senior leader, and to offer the CEO everything that they need.
So, should HR leaders, CHROs, CPOs, contribute on HR topics only in executive spaces?
No, I absolutely believe that if you only speak up when it is your subject matter expertise, if you only speak up when it is your functional topic, you are a second-tier executive. You are not part of the C-suite. You are not part of the leadership team. You are not contributing the way every company needs. When you have a C-suite that is all swimming in the same direction to achieve business goals, but yet is bringing their lens from their particular expertise, whether it be science or technology or people or finance, you then are looking at the world holistically. You're looking at a goal from every angle. And that makes a better business. That makes a more successful likelihood of outcome. And it definitely makes a more dynamic and more successful leadership team. If, as a chief people officer, I don't feel compelled or comfortable challenging my chief strategy officer on an idea or a direction they're heading, if I don't feel comfortable or welcome to challenge that, then how can I be responsible for the success of the business? I can only be responsible for the things in which I have ultimate control. And therefore I can say, well, I've brought in the best people, but if they can't do what you need to do, maybe your goals are bad. Maybe what we're asking people to do is unreasonable. And I can scapegoat. And I think when you have teams where that is a possibility, it is more likely to happen. But when I'm responsible for the goals, I was a part of setting them. I know they're reasonable. I I'm making decisions based on that. I can't point fingers at someone else. Ultimately, I am accountable for the success of the business.
Your perspective must be holistic. You must connect with people and the business, and you must challenge the status quo. What should a great CPO, CHRO bring to the table?
I think a great chief people officer, chief human resource officer, whichever title you are using, I think that person has a responsibility to hold up a mirror to the CEO, to be able to say, all right, what are you trying to accomplish here? What are you going to try and do? And then I will give you feedback after the fact to say whether or not you've held your ground or you showed up the way you needed to be. No one is going to get that feedback easily when they're at the top of the org chart. But when you have this trusted relationship with your chief people officer, that can be the person who can coach you in the moment, who can give you honest feedback, who can observe you and help you make tough decisions. We're all human beings, and our strengths and development areas can be magnified when the decisions that we're making are make or break for the company. And so having a sounding board, having a trusted partner that is with you all the time, is a really, really valuable asset. Now, I do know some CEOs who have external coaches who play that role for them. But the challenge there is that external coach is usually not at the company day to day observing that person. They're hearing first or secondhand feedback, or they're hearing reiterations of what someone thought happened as opposed to being able to observe it in real time. And I think you miss some of that. And you also have an added layer of personal context that gets added that is different than observing someone in real time. I also think that being a CEO can be one of the loneliest jobs because you feel like, you know, ultimately you're the one throat to choke. But having that partnership with your chief people officer gives you an outlet to be able to show your frustration before you have to walk in and pretend that you're not frustrated. It gives you an outlet to test your approach before you react in front of the whole company. And I think those types of partnerships and relationships, when the chemistry is good, when there's a real level of trust and vulnerability, that's when a CEO can really step into their power.
¿Alguna vez has sentido que puedes ser parte de algo más grande? En Hackers del Talento exploramos ideas y sobre todo trabajamos incansablemente por crear un camino hacia un mundo laboral más humano y próspero. Y lo sabes, tú eres parte crítica en esta misión. Imagina el efecto mariposa de compartir este episodio. Al pasar la voz a alguien que conoces, puede ser el catalizador de un cambio profundo en la vida de alguien más. Piensa en esa persona, alguien que como tú está listo para crecer y evolucionar. Compartir este episodio con ella no es solo un acto de generosidad, es un paso hacia la construcción de una comunidad más fuerte y unida. Únete a nosotros y sé parte de la vanguardia del cambio en el mundo laboral. Te puedes suscribir en LinkedIn buscando Hackers del Talento para descubrir diariamente aprendizajes del mundo del trabajo. Además, si ingresas a nuestra página web hackersdeltalento.com, te esperará nuestro newsletter Cartas al Talento, lleno de hacks y reflexiones semanales. Y recuerda, cada pequeña acción cuenta. Al unirte a nosotros, más que escuchar un podcast, estás activando un movimiento. Estás formando parte de una transformación global. Estamos aquí, listos para avanzar. Te quiero hacer una pregunta. ¿Te sumas a nuestra misión de transformar el mundo laboral en un lugar donde todos podemos prosperar? Pues bueno, continuemos juntos en este emocionante viaje y sigamos escuchando el episodio. Recuerda, tu presencia es el cambio. How often do you use that mirror with the C-level team? Consider this both an invitation and a challenge to shift a paradigm.
I have met a lot of chief people officers who have said, I worked in the business first. I was this other role first. I was that other role first. I never meet a chief people officer who says, after I was a chief people officer, I went and took on this head of marketing, chief marketing officer, or chief sales officer. I never hear that story. And I think it would be really interesting to change the paradigm, to have more respect for the people function as a critical success factor of the business.
An invitation to dive deep into models and frameworks for optimal work.
I think we really need to learn more and investigate more about work location, remote work, hybrid work, and productivity. I think we are being archaic in the ways we are thinking through how people work together and what is important. And I don't think we've really figured out how to assess whether or not any of the work solutions that we're trying are working. We tend to use perceived happiness and perceived productivity as a metric of whether or not our employees are engaged. We also have tended to use, and I don't mean we like Alphabet, I mean in the HR industry, we are looking at leaders showing up in the office and looking around and saying, I don't see any people, and therefore I feel like no one's working. I don't think we've done enough analysis about what work requires us to be together and what work we would be as effective doing apart. And I think that there's a lot of innovation we can do in this space.
An idea for startups and new companies.
I don't think young companies spend enough time doing succession planning and management. And it often then becomes an emergency when someone leaves. And I think it is a practice that big companies do all the time. They have a rhythm for it. But startups and younger companies often think, I'm not going to waste my time on that, or too much is going to change by the time that's going to happen, that we're going to have to do it all over again. But I think the rhythm and the rigor of thinking about what's on the horizon, what are the skills we're going to need in these roles in 12 to 18 months, and who would we go after if we needed to? Do we have the bench strength already? Most of them don't, and that's okay. But looking externally and doing external succession planning, I think is as valuable as doing internal succession planning. So I see companies a lot when they do succession plan, think about who is my right hand, who are my natural internal successors. And if they don't have them, how are they going to develop those people and how long might it take? And I always encourage, especially in startups and small companies where they don't have enormous organizations, and they have a lot of specialization in their people and roles, to say, okay, who externally would you look at for this role? Who would you want to tap on the shoulder? Who would you want to encourage to apply because they have all the skills? And that has really paid off in places where we've done that
work. Before we close this episode, a few pieces of advice.
The best advice that I got when I was up and coming in my career was to mirror the body language and the behavior of the executives that I was in the room with, and to not be the person in the room who was taking notes. And the reason for that was that often in the HR space, we do take notes. It shows engagement. We might need to jot something down that we want to remember. But it also, unfortunately, creates an appearance of subservience. If you're the one taking notes, you're not necessarily the one who they are perceiving as an equal player or contributor in the meeting. And so when I heard this, I started to really change my behavior in meetings, and the way people interacted with me was completely different. I would sit back in my chair. I had my notebook in front of me. I might write down 1 word or 2 words, but I was making eye contact. I was not furiously scribbling. I was getting a lot more questions from the group and a lot more directed comments than when I had my head buried in my notebook. And I think that was such great advice to create the appearance of an equal at the table by something so very small that I just didn't even realize was making me look like I wasn't an equal. I have shared that advice with many people, and I think it has made a big difference in their relationship management and in their ability to build trust, especially when there is a discrepancy in leveling.
Jennifer Turner is an incredible woman with humility, creativity, and amazing experience. Here are my 3 hacks. First, walk with curiosity in life, in work, in every moment, because it will open up unexpected doors. 2, every company needs someone to play the role of the C-suite whisperer if we want to put people at the center. And 3, it's critical to contribute not just in people matters, but in business, impact, and also challenging the organization. See you in the next episode of Hackers del Talento.